Mainstream history tells us that the ancient Egyptians, the people of the Indus Valley and of Sumer, developed independently and had no contact for centuries. However, by studying their temples, by studying their weights and measures, by studying their legends and symbols, I think we can create a very strong case to say that this is not correct. And so not just with the Great Pyramid, but we're going to have a look at the Red Pyramid at Dashur, but also as this series progresses, I'm going to start incorporating knowledge from the Sumerian Babylonian culture, well, especially the Sumerian, and as well as the Indus Valley cultures, most famous for the cities of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, and show that their connections between them are very deep and very old, and that through the study of their weights and their measures, we can show that not only were they in contact and in trade in a very deep level many centuries before the official timeline would suggest, but also to begin examining a deeper idea of a single source of an original culture, which would be a much better explanation why they had these similarities, because these similarities also extend to the stone circle builders in the Britons and elsewhere, including the Mesoamerican people. Hello, in older videos at a recent upload, I was examining the claim that the pyramid is at a ratio to the Earth at 1 at 43,200, and I was examining that, showing how that's usually based on like they sort of don't have the now people like Randall Carlson and others do go into detail in explaining this, but the imagery and the info that does around is actually not correct, because, for instance, they're not examining the point that it's not the Great Pyramid itself, but it's the paving stones and the sockles, or the sockets at the corner that are the most important. So the pyramid itself begins here with, we can see the rest of what survives of the casing stones, and then we have the paving stones or the socle underneath. Now it's Matthew Flinders Petrie, for instance, and other, what we have at the corners is the sockets, and we actually need to include these to get the proportions of the Great Pyramid in relation to the Earth, and we also have to include the paving stones underneath. Now, in this next series of videos, I'm going to go on to explain some very important information in regards to these, how they connect ancient cultures such as the Sumerians and the Indus Valley, Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, for instance, and how, once again, that the 43,200 thinking will actually put blinkers on and not reveal this very important deeper set of connections that will extend to other pyramids in Egypt as well. And so, just as a review, if the 43,200 is, well, again, there's a lot of problems with it, and that's got to do with the irregularities in the sockets at the corner. They're not all equal, and that in itself, not only that, it only describes half the Earth, which is quite inelegant. So, just as a review, I'll put the link to that video in the description as well, where I examine this and explain it in detail. But what we have is a series of inelegant issues, and it's based on two-dimensional thinking of a three-dimensional object. And yeah, so we're thinking 2D about something that's 3D. We need to think about 3D. We also need to think about time, because the time will bring us back to the Royal Egyptian Cubit, which was used at this pyramid, and others, for instance, the Red Pyramid at Dashur. So if we stand at the northeast corner, we look at the pyramid as a pyramid and not as some shapes on paper. What we get is the pyramid at the proportion of the Earth, also incorporating the speed of the Earth per second, the second being key, because it brings us back to the pendulum. So this pendulum, what we have is 30 degrees. Now 30 degrees is relevant because that's the position of Heliopolis, north of the equator, and this 30-degree angle has been highlighted by other researchers, how we have all these sacred sites on this tilted 30-degree circumference of the Earth. So for instance, Angkor Wat, Easter Island, they're all proportioned at beautiful phi ratios, for instance, and that's based on the 30-degree angle, the 30 degrees being north, and again back to this 30-degree pendulum. And a 1 meter long pendulum swung between 30 degrees, which is an important number as well, because if you swing it too much, the pendulum won't actually swing, it will jerk at various places. So uh, for many centuries it's been used at 30 degrees to create this 1 second pendulum. The original meter arose from a pendulum of 1 second swung at 30 degrees. This goes back long before the meter was defined as a proportion of the circumference, polar circumference of the Earth. So this is all again verified, documented. But what we have is one Egyptian Royal Cubit being the arc when we swing it at 30 degrees. And of course, that gives us 86,400 seconds per day, which is the proportion of the Great Pyramid to the size of the Earth, looking at it as a pyramid, not as a square and a triangle on a piece of paper. And so not only is that inelegant, but it also doesn't give you, I'm going to show you, it's going to lead to so much connections, which is going to connect us to other civilizations. And using the same pendulum, using the magic wand or the ruler as it is I just recently posted a series in regards to the symbolism of ancient Greece and Sumer and well many other places in regards to the importance of weights and measures. And this is all going to come back together, and it's going to link many sites across Egypt, many sites across the world, and many cultures which supposedly were not in contact at this point. And so once again, 86,400 is the number you need to consider, and also the use of the pendulum, the Royal Egyptian Cubit, the meter, three-dimensional thinking, and time ties this all in together. Quite confident, and I'm going to explain why. Because, pardon, we go to the Red Pyramid at the show, and here we see what was found. Capstone was found there and reconstructed, and in what was surely one of the greatest acts of vandalism, and no surprise it was done under the care of Zawi Hawass. The reason this capstone is so important and why it was such an act of horrific vandalism that this was altered is because this information is very relevant not just to Egypt but to many other places in the world, and I'm going to put forth that this capstone was a conversion tool, a way for the construction workers to get the basic units with which to create the the Red Pyramid, which also connects very strongly to the Great Pyramid because of the cubit that was used and the proportions, as I'll show you in a moment. So it's a measuring wand or a wand or a measuring tool. And because it fits into, well, for instance, the Salamis Stone, I'll put the links in the description because it has to do with the Parthenon, but this Salamis Stone was a conversion tool where different workers could get their units of measurement together, and it also includes the so-called relatively modern English foot being used at least 2,500 years ago, is visible in the Parthenon. And so what we have is multiple units of measure coming together at very harmonic points, and this being one of the key of what the temple purpose is used at sacred proportions, sacred numbers, and for instance the Salamis Stone itself is at a 2:3 ratio, just like the Parthenon is built, it's incorporated within the Parthenon. Well, the Red Pyramid ratio to the height of the Great Pyramid is at this very musical, very beautiful 3:2 proportion, which of course is also in the Parthenon. And the Parthenon as well, the proportion of the architraves to the columns is this 3:11, which gives us the Great Pyramid proportions, which delivers us information on phi and pi and so many others. Now in that Parthenon series I also focused on Sanchi Stupa and many connections in there, and the proportions within this temple also encodes these pyramid proportions, but it also it becomes a Salamis Stone of its own because the measures that are used in here are at beautiful points which harmonize multiple sets of measure but at very beautiful points. So for instance the measures and the proportions brings us to 7 and 11, for instance, which gives us, when we cross to Cremona, gives us the 7/11 scale, or of course the 22/7 scale of the Great Pyramid. So this capstone, just like the pyramid itself, just like all these temples, amongst other purposes, are about harmony at units of measure, and that's why this one is so important, because it contains the meter. So we had this original capstone, and what was that capstone? That capstone was 1 metre. 1 metre gives us 1 Egyptian Royal Cubit, and the base of it was pi/2 meters, or 3 Egyptian Royal Cubits. So there we have our tie-in. So it's not just by coincidence at the Great Pyramid, it also brings us to the Red Pyramid and many others at the shore. But why was it an act of vandalism? Because this was the original reconstruction of it, and as faithful as they could do. What happened under the care of Zawi Hawass? It's been butchered, it's been vandalized. The knowledge, this important piece of knowledge which connects us to the well-established Egyptian Royal Cubit, has been, effing vandalized. And this is just another example of the criminality of certain people amongst the establishment, who will not allow serious researchers, mathematicians and others to examine it properly and use measurement, and again to study it in that way, and again it leaves the field open and to people muddying the waters and putting all sorts of explanations to this, as instead of doing it in a more disciplined manner. But what we have is another example of the metre, the cubit, and therefore the second coming together. And this is one of the very important pieces of information, because the concept of the second and the pendulum and ancient units of measure, including Sumerian and the Indus, will bring us, will describe so much, and we'll begin with measures, but this will also bring together with weights, and these weights which will connect these civilizations, I will show without a doubt were at least in contact 500 years earlier than what they would, the establishment will allow us to talk about, but surely also points to ancient knowledge across multiple civilizations, and you cannot call it coincidence. It's a mental illness to say no, because I'm going to show you empirical evidence, measurable, testable facts, as opposed to so much guff, both on the alternative but also on the mainstream. And that's unfortunate, because both of them are in an echo chamber and they can't break loose, firstly of this 43,200 scale, but also that on the opposite scale, that the mainstream can, well, the guardians, the gatekeepers of the mainstream, such as Zawi Hawass, cannot break free of this. But there have been many academic researchers who have investigated these and other aspects, basically had their careers ruined by them, and their serious researchers got buried on most of the so-called researchers, because they bring up other stuff. But there has been serious measurable, testable research into this, and we'll get to that in a second. And so begin with that. What we have is this capstone, the metre, the second, which of course, again, just to repeat, brings us to the Great Pyramid as well, and another example of, well, what's been vandalism and suppression of important measurable knowledge, which, it's left the field open to so much speculation and pseudo research by the alternative folks. And anyway, so okay, this is the beginning, and I'm going to go through a whole series with this, explaining, showing you, and bringing actual data to the table, rather than this pseudo speculation based on all sorts of unresearched, poorly researched echo chamber type of stuff. With known techniques, we can explain almost everything, and there are some very important mysteries, still some very important unanswered questions to do with this, but we'll get to those as we go along. apart from the Red Pyramid and the Great Pyramid having this 3:2 proportion which emerges from the vesica, the geometry of this is also very important because it will also link us back to the capstone, and why I think one of the reasons for the suppression, let's call it, of what's going on there, because it flies in the face of the standard. So again, there's a lot of information that would just basically destroy the reputations and put a lot of the textbooks into the rubbish bin. So there's a lot of money, a lot of reputation involved in that. But we have a 1 metre high and pi over 2 or 3 Egyptian royal cubits wide at the base of this capstone. Now there's some lovely geometry that emerges from that, and from the vesica we get the seed, the flower, and what's called the fruit of life here. Again, there's a lot of pretty gifts and sort of fluffy stuff around there, but the basic geometry is the important feature. But the reason why also it is important, because we see it at the Osiron temple etched on there, and there's also some a little bit iffy stuff around how, but the geometry is definitely there, and let's focus on that. And so, with compass and straight edge, with a pendulum, with some very basic tools, we can extract some very important data which connects multiple temples across Egypt, Indus, Sumeria, and again through the later Persian, Greco-Roman period, even up to this very day itself, especially anything connected with things like George Washington and Governor Macquarie here in Australia practicing Freemasons in that term. So beginning with the vesica, you just keep drawing these circles, you just keep, wherever they intersect, you just keep expanding out, and that's how we create the seed of life, as it's called, and then the flower of life, and then the fruit of life. Now, I use the term sacred geometry because that's what's taken hold, but this is just Euclidean geometry, and it's it doesn't need to be sacred in that way if you don't like that term. But this is the geometry which defines so many of these ancient temples, not just in the symbolism in regards to the drawing, but also in the proportions themselves, such as the 2:3, and why it's in the Salamis Stone and in, again, these other temples, including pyramids. Using this very same basic geometry, the vesica pies these 2 circles with the second circle having its center on the other. We can also, we'll create the pendulum, but also want to reconstruct the capstone, the destroyed capstone, vandalized capstone from the Red Pyramid, and show how the metre, the Royal Cubit, and this pendulum come together. And it's, again, some very simple geometry. It's very beautiful geometry, and as with so much of this, it's with very simple tools, with some very basic knowledge, and we can create so much, we can extract so much. And so the cubit, the metre, and time connecting so many sites across Old Kingdom, ancient Egypt. And so yeah, we'll do a reconstruction and show how the capstone and the pendulum, the metre and the cubit all come together with basic geometry.
I would like to begin, well, in this particular piece, just wanted to show how with some very simple geometry we can begin to unlock many mysteries in regards to not only the Great Pyramid, but for instance also the Red Pyramid at Dashur. And this connects to the magic wand or the rod or the measuring tool, and in this case we have a 1 metre ruler. And now what I'm going to do is just with a compass and straight edge, and so I've already begun with a construction line just to help us, but what I've done is I'm going to set the compass to 25 centimetres or 0.2734 yards. This number is key. This is built into the proportions and the measures of the Great Pyramid, and it's with so much other architecture. This 273 and 2734, I'll go into those later, but do not underestimate this. This is vital importance. And so we've got, and so in this demonstration I'm going to show how well, to begin with, the capstone at the Pyramid of Dashur, which was reconstructed and then vandalised under the care of Zawi Hawass. The missing capstone there, or the capstone which was found, was 1 metre high and 3 Egyptian Royal Cubits at the base. The 1 metre length gives us a 1 metre pendulum, which creates 1 second, which creates the Egyptian Royal Cubit used in the Great Pyramid and the Pyramid of Dashur, Red Pyramid, and some other many other places, which will join us with the Sumerians and with the Indus ancient civilizations, and that they're all using the same weights and measures, and 273 being one of the main points of connection. And so the capstone itself was 1 metre high, and that's other demonstrations will show, but we've begun. So I've set my compass at 1/4 metre or 0.2734 yards. I'll begin with a construction line, and now let's do what's called the vesica, the basic unit in sacred geometry. So we begin with a circle, and just to make sure it is easy to see, I'm just going to highlight, go around a few times. And so now we have a circle. The vesica, which is a important symbol in many ancient cultures, for instance, it's another term for it is the vesica piscis, vesica piscis. It literally translates into the vessel of the fish. So now I've put my compass point on the edge of that circle, and why I'm also using this homemade compass is to illustrate the point that you don't need an expensive fancy tool. You can construct these from bits just laying around, and that's one of the beauties of it. Now this also will, using this same method as I've in another demonstration, I showed how we can create the 30-degree pendulum tool. So now we have what's called the vesica. 1, 2, 3 wide and 1, 2 high. So we have a 2 to 3 ratio as well. And so why is that important? The height of the Great Pyramid is 2 compared to the base length of the Red Pyramid at Dashur, 3. So, and this is also found in, for instance, the Parthenon. I've done a whole series on that, and how these same proportions, same measurements reoccur across time, cross cultures, even in India. And this is very in music as well. So this 2 to 3 ratio, which again extends across all these ancient temples. And one of the key reasons for these temples, whether it's the Parthenon, the Pyramid, Sanchi Stupa, is to create a conversion tool. Even the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Preserver of Life, or New Jerusalem, describe conversion tools where it bring multiple sets of measures together. But now I mentioned the Red Pyramid, the Capstone, which was vandalised, was originally 1 metre high and 3 Royal Egyptian cubits high. Now, these two circles, (25 centimetre radius, 2 to 3 ratio, which again describes the proportions between the Red Pyramid and the Great Pyramid, which are both based on the cubit of 0.5236 metres, or pi over 6 metres. So one Egyptian Royal Cubit is 0.5236 metres, which is pi over 6, or in feet, that's 1.71818118 feet, or E minus 1 within a hairbreadth as well. Pi and E, 2 to 3, 273, it's all in here, and these are just beautiful in nature and in maths. These are just the coolest, some of the coolest of the cool numbers going around. And so now, just with this basic construction now, I'm able to create an equilateral triangle. I actually don't even have to draw the triangle, because what we have already is a conversion tool. And by that I mean, so we've divided the circle into 3 points. The radius of the circle is 0.25 metres, or 0.2734 yards, which means this section of arc, 1/3 of that circle, is pi over 6 meters, or 0.5236 meters, or 1 Egyptian royal cubit as defined and used in the Great Pyramid. Therefore, the circumference of this circle, that would be another cubit, and that would be another Royal Egyptian cubit, which means our circumference is 3 Egyptian royal cubits. The base of the capstone found at the Red Pyramid is 3 Egyptian royal cubits, and the height of that capstone was 1 metre.
So with this very simple geometry based on these important units of measure, which again all connect and bleed into each other. Now I've done this on a piece of paper, so if I was to, for instance, have ruined a bed sheet and done it on, I could have then cut the circle out and stretched it straight, and then I would have achieved the base of that vandalised cap from the Red Pyramid there. And again, working on a metre, I used a quarter metre. That's 1/2 and 1/2 again. Very easy, very again easy to achieve that ratio. So some simple geometry, doing it on a piece of cloth instead of a piece of paper, we can achieve those exact proportions and then convert it into straight lines. Next, with using nothing more than a vesica and a few straight lines, I'll show you how to draw or to create a compass, sorry, not a compass, the pendulum here, which from the 1 metre just is used in the capstone found at the Red Pyramid of Dashur, the Egyptian Royal Cubits which form the base, the Egyptian Royal Cubits which define the Red Pyramid and the Great Pyramid and many other of these sites across ancient Egypt. And again, some very simple geometry, some very simple tools to bring us a whole set of knowledge which is so vital in so many of these sites, and defining still to this day the 1 second clock which defines our world. Well, it's based around a pendulum, 1 metre, which is of course defines an Egyptian royal cubit. So using some very basic tools such as a compass and straight edge, we're going to create a template to make a pendulum, which is very important in measuring time, but we'll also be able to use this to create ancient units of measure and show how the second, the metre, the cubit, the Indus Valley from the Mohenjo-Daro civilization, the Sumerian foot, all blend in together to create a perfect system of geometry. And so we begin with the vesica Pisces, or the vesica piscis, the vessel of a fish. It's a standard symbol still, for instance, in Christianity, so many other religions as well, loaded with geometric mathematical knowledge. It's this type of geometric construction was the basis for what's called Greek geometry, and so all we need is 2 circles of the same size, with the center of one being on the edge of the first. And with this we're going to create a pendulum, but also one of the basic standard drawing tools that you get in your geometry set or your drawing kit, and that's the 30, 60, 90 degree compass. So just to highlight, I've shown those 2 points. Now another one of the powers of this very simple construction is that we get 90, 90, 90 degrees. So we've created a line. So this is even for basic drawings. If you want to create a square, to do any of these sorts of things, we begin with the vesica there. And it also has musical proportions because it's 2 radiuses high and 3 radiuses wide. So we have this 2:3 ratio, which is used in places such as the Parthenon, but also, well, across the world, even like for instance here in Australia, the street plans and street grids, 2:3, this, yes, very musical proportion. And if you're into your geometry, it's also a perfect way to start a Fibonacci spiral, so we can create phi very easily from this. And so with those points created, and now we have a line at yeah, well, going across, so east and west in that sense as well. And now I'm highlighting that point, and I'm going to draw a line from the corner down. And what we've done now is we've created a 30. What we're going to create is a 30-degree angle, which is also one of these basic of the set squares that you get in your drawing kit, the 45, 45, and 90. and the 30, 60, 90 degree triangle that we see here. And this will, well, again, it's loaded with info, so the positions of certain ancient sites, again, the angles and the proportions used in cathedral, temple, major public buildings, especially those connected with the esoteric, and there you can see what I mean by that set square. And but that's 30, 30, 30, 60, 90. So what we want to do is create an isosceles triangle, so it has a 30 degrees at the sharp point, and the other 2 points would be 75 and 75. And just by drawing an arc, so now the length of from the center point, each leg of this isosceles triangle, or triangle of equal legs, is created. And so now we just draw the line across. It's not even necessary to draw a line across, but now we can just bisect the angle. And again, this is one of the basic constructions in geometry. Unlike trisecting an angle, which is a problem, bisecting an angle or cutting it in half is very easy. And to do that, and so I'm just highlighting the arc, like I narrating. I drew this, and then I'm narrating it afterwards. But so now we've created this isosceles triangle, and now to bisect the angle, all we have to do is adjust the compass over half length. You can just choose any length you want. You can eyeball it, but it's just got to be over half. And we draw an arc or a half circle, and we do that again on the opposite. And now what we've done is we've bisected the angle. So I can just draw with these 2 points, and I can carry that line up to the center. And what we've done, so we've cut a 30 degree angle into half, so we have 2 sections of 15 degrees. And this is the very, very easy way to create the pendulum. And so now we just need to cut it up, and I'll show you how we can use that to create a pendulum, and this very important pendulum. And basic geometry, some very basic tools: compass and straight edge, a weight, and a piece of string. We have quite a bit of ancient knowledge in finger quotes, and this will also deliver some very important connections to the Great Pyramid, and many other ancient sites. And just as an example there, so what I've done is created a 30, 60, 90 degree set square, and I've bisected the angle, so we have 30 degrees in total, or 2 sections of 15 degrees. And it's important to get that middle line, because we're going to use that as our vertical. And so there we can see the pendulum on the right, and now I'm just going to show. And so just as so there you can see 30 degrees. Now if I hold that up, so there you can see how we so first you would hang a plumb to get the vertical, to make it level, not level, but straight up and down, horizontal. And with that 30 we can then use that as a template to extend it down. Then we just need to get an ancient unit of measure, so we could use the Indus or the Sumerian or the Saxon foot, or we could get 3 medieval royal feet, or we could get the metre, which we know now. Now this particular one I have there, the video of the pendulum swinging is based on the Indus, Sumerian, or the Saxon foot of 3 feet. But then I'll explain that in some follow-ups, because it's whether it's a metre or a Saxon metre. Again, it's delivering us some very important intro. And so basic geometry, some very basic tools, and we begin to have the building blocks of the weights and measures that are so important in ancient cultures. And so with this 1 meter pendulum created, we now have 1 second, 1 Royal Egyptian cubit, which will also give us the scaling of the Earth to the size of the Earth scale to the Great Pyramid itself. But also with simple multiplication, we can also now create the proportions of the Great Pyramid itself, not including the cycle, just the pyramid itself, 280 by 440 Royal Egyptian cubits. And again, this information connects back to, well, so many other aspects, and in future episodes I'm going to show you some very important information which connects the pendulum to the Indus and Sumerian cultures as well. Of course, this also can be applied to the Red Pyramid at Dashur, because we have now the basic unit, and with simple multiplication, 440 by 200, we get the height. And so from these very basic geometric tools, from a piece of string and a weight or a plumb, as we know that they were using, as we know many cultures were using, we can extract this information, and we also, well, we can create the 1 second, which is so important in any activity such as metallurgy or time, anything that involves timekeeping, and the pendulum being one of the most obvious and ancient methods of doing this. And so this is the end of this particular episode. I'm going to, again, there'll be much, much more to come. And I'm going to show you that the Sumerian and the Indus and the ancient Egyptian Old Kingdom were using the same methods containing the same information, and that was not just embedded in their temples and in the measures of their temples, and the temples such as the Great Pyramid and others, amongst other points, are also conversion tools, measuring tools, encoding these very sacred numbers through very sacred measures as well as proportions. But more than that, the weights that these society, the Indus, Sumerian and the Egyptian, also had standard weights which will have to push back the date of trade, but also again to bring forth a more strong argument that there was a common source for these cultures. And there's been some work by other people showing how but there were these other much older blocks. So before Egypt, at least the official dating of Egypt, before Stonehenge, before the monuments and alignments in Karnak in France, as well as, well, across the world, the ones that we know so, are the ones that are so iconic. But they contain information. The stories and the legends bleed together to show that there is an older source for this, that we're just seeing the river, we're not seeing all the little streams that have come together to form this. And in the future series I will bring forth and build up a case to show that, yes, that not only were the ancient cultures that we know about, or that are commonly known about, not only were they in contact, not only were they in trade, but they were in sophisticated trade. They were using the same weights and measures, the same symbols, the same legends, but also that, and to at least begin examining that there is an older source to this, that they had a common source, and the flood legends that they all share is surely one of the strongest cases to make around this. And if you're not familiar, please look up Randall Carlson, because in terms of geological evidence, he's shown some amazing connections, some really strong evidence to date certain events in history which have shaped us. And again, so the flood of Noah is the one that's commonly known, but the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Manu in ancient India and Pakistan, same sort of stories can be found in pre-Columbian Mexico. They can also be found here amongst indigenous cultures in Australia, and also relics of that story can also be found in Christian traditions, such as where my parents come from themselves. They still tell a very similar story on the Day of the Dead as well. So with that, hope you enjoyed part one. A lot more to come. Cheerio and have a good one.